Hi everyone, I'm Zach, and this is my teammate Casey for the religious freedom assignment. For our religious freedom assignment, this case that we're going to go over is the Santa Fe Independent School District versus Doe. Just to give you a brief overview of kind of where we're going to go with this presentation. First, I'm going to talk about a brief introduction and executive summary, mentioning the case in its simplicity before I'm going to turn it over to Casey, who's going to talk about the involved parties and how they are affiliated to this case. She will go into a discussion, all of their roles, mention the case, everything that it's about, walking us through from its summary to from its inception to its ruling, where the Supreme Court eventually ruled in favor of the Doe. She's going to turn it back over to me. I'm going to talk about the major religious freedom issues, namely the Establishment Clause, which is the primary religious freedom issue in this case. I'm going to also mention the Supreme Court's ruling, why they ruled where they ruled, how they ruled what they ruled, their eventual decision, and the justification thereof. Before we are going to talk about why we actually side with the dissent in terms of this religious freedom assignment, because we think the dissent had a far more comprehensive and better argument, more constitutional argument. We're going to touch on three main arguments why we think the dissent had the better argument in our reflection. I will talk on the first two, and then I will turn it over to Casey. She'll mention the last one, and then we'll wrap this presentation up. So just to give you a brief overview, introduction to this case, the Texas Independent School District, the Santa Fe Independent School District was a Texas school district that started allowing student-led prayer before varsity football games. This caused some dissent among some parents and families who felt that this was in violation of their religious freedom from religion. So this was taken to the district court, then to the Fifth Court Circuit of Appeals, and then the eventually Supreme Court, where they ruled that this policy was in violation of the Establishment Clause in the year 2000. The justification that the court provided essentially was that this was not protected religious speech, as it was using a lot of the school property and it was pseudo school sponsored, and so therefore it gave the appearance of endorsement of religion. The dissent, on the other hand, argued that the student-led prayer was protected because it was student-led, it was private, and it was religious speech protected under the Establishment Clause. I'll turn it over to Casey. She'll give you a little bit more detail on the case, how it happened, and the different related parties.
There we go. Yep. So the two parties involved here, we have the Santa Fe Independent School District and Doe. Doe is actually an anonymous name that the families that sued the school district chose to go under just to avoid any prosecution or just, I guess, bad publicity to their name if they were worried about their students. So this includes two sets of current or former students and their mothers. One family we know is Mormon and the other is Catholic. The Santa Fe Independent School District. It's a political subdivision of Texas. It includes over 4,000 students and Santa Fe High School, as well as two primary schools, an intermediate school, and a junior high school. And so Doe actually sued Santa Fe Independent School District because they claimed that they were organizing prayer before varsity football games, and they felt it was an infringement upon their religious protections in the First Amendment Establishment Clause. On the other hand, Santa Fe claimed that they were prayers that were non-proselytizing and non-sectarian, and that they weren't directly endorsing one religion, but rather they were giving the student a platform for their own religious expression. So a little bit about the case. This came up in April of 1995. Prior to 1995, there was always a student chaplain that delivered prayers before each varsity football game. And it wasn't until this case that it was actually challenged in the district court as a violation of the First Amendment Establishment Clause. And during these proceedings, the Santa Fe Independent School District actually adopted different policies to kind of smooth over the case and try and make things, or at least show that they were not trying to endorse one particular religion and that they were actually leaving it up to the students. Doe was a little bit upset that there was an upcoming graduation ceremony, that there was also likely going to be prayers. So they tried to basically prohibit the school district from allowing these prayers to happen at upcoming graduation ceremonies. So this actually leads us into our first policy, which is their May policy. Again, they sued in April 1995. So obviously graduation was coming up in May, and the district responded by basically installing this election process by secret ballot where the graduation class was able to vote whether they wanted invocations or benedictions to happen at the graduation ceremony. And then if they voted in favor of this happening, they also did another election Same process by secret ballot, where they had the graduating class vote for the student that they wanted to deliver the invocation. And again, they said this was simply for the purpose of solemnizing the graduation ceremony and not because they had any direct religious intent behind it. Then this leads us to our July policy, pretty much the same as the May policy, it just eliminated the requirement that these invocations and benedictions had to be non-proselytizing or non-sectarian, which means they didn't have to avoid being affiliated with a specific religious group. And this again was up to the student who delivered the invocation. It just gave them the freedom to, if they wanted to pray to their God, they could do so and not be penalized for it. But again, they weren't requiring the student to talk about a specific religion or push a specific religion. They just opened it up for the opportunity for the student to express themselves however they chose to do so. The August policies where we start to see more of a lean towards the football games. So this was actually titled Prayer at Football Games. It's the same exact election process, but now just applied to varsity football games as well. So again, they got to elect whether they wanted the invocations to happen in this setting and who they wanted to deliver it if they chose to. And then October policy, very similar to the August policy. It just changed the word prayer to messages, statements, or invocations. So just opened it up to make sure it wasn't directly aiming at trying to promote prayer. It was just a message or statement that the student that was elected was going to deliver. It didn't have to be directly related to a religion or to even a prayer.
And while all of this discussion was going on, the district court actually ruled in favor of Doe. The Independent School District of Santa Fe appealed this. It went up to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. They sided with Doe. This was eventually taken to the Supreme Court, and in 2000, the case was finally taken, and the Supreme Court also ruled in a 6-3 majority in favor of Doe that in this situation, these policies were government endorsement of religion. Even though it wasn't technically outright endorsement of religion, the court argued that because it was public school property, it was school-sponsored events, and it was the school-controlled sound system, that it was sort of a pseudo endorsement of religion that gave the appearance that the school was supporting one religion over the other, which would have violated the Establishment Clause, was their logic. They also raised a lot of coercion concerns, which, as Casey mentioned in the last couple of slides, where one specific religious group feels like they are forced to practice a different religion against their will, or feel pressured to engage in religious activities when they don't see fit, which would be violation of their religious freedom. The court also mentioned a lack of neutrality, where, as I mentioned earlier, it seemed that the school district was taking sides towards one religion over another. And then they also lastly talked a lot about historical precedent in their eventual ruling, mentioning a lot of different cases. Two of the main ones were Lemon v. Kurtzman in 1971, which is where we get the Lemon test, which is a three-pronged test where you can hold up all religious freedom issues and see if they violate the Establishment Clause. And then the Levy-Wiseman test, which is a 1992 case that involved an invocation at a graduation ceremony where the Supreme Court in 1992 ruled that it was in violation of the Establishment Clause to use that as historical precedent. So ultimately, the court sided with Doe, saying that the student-led prayer over the PA system was unconstitutional and should therefore be prohibited from there and out. To talk more on the Establishment Clause and its application to this case, it comes from the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, and it reads that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. There are four main principles that we think are very applicable to this case, the first being neutrality. As mentioned earlier, the government can't show favoritism to any one religion or another, or favor any secular beliefs, or vice versa. Coercion, which is preventing any religious group from being or feeling pressured to engage in religious activities they don't see fit. Financial support, which prevents the government from contributing to anything outright religious in nature. This comes from Emerson v. Board of Education in 1947, where they ruled that the government or any government adjacent institution has no right to contribute financially to any religious organization. And finally, the principle of separation of church and state, which comes from the Thomas Jefferson principle, where he talks about there being a wall between church and state, which is essentially just to ensure that government roles and religious roles do not overlap with each other, offering freedom from religion and freedom of religion, protecting both. To go on our three main arguments, why we actually believe that the dissent had the far better argument in this case and why the court actually should have ruled differently. The first is actually going to be the Lemon test, which is mentioned in the Supreme Court ruling. Again, this comes from the Lemon v. Kurtzman case in 1971. This is essentially used as a test to determine if the government action will violate the Establishment Clause. It kind of hinges on three prongs. First, that the legislation must serve secular legislative purpose, that its primary effect cannot be an endorsement of any one religion or another, talking more about that neutrality agreement. And finally, there's no excessive entanglement in religion or religious affairs from that law for any government institution. But we feel like, unlike how the court ruled, we've sided the defense. This provides a far better argument and justification for how the Santa Fe Independent School District actually upholds all three of the prongs in the limit test. First of all, it actually does serve a secular legislative purpose because the intent was more sportsmanship, unity, and freedom of expression. The school itself was not outright endorsing any religion. It was simply bringing everyone together, allowing the students to elect whoever they wanted to say whatever they wanted. It just, in this case, for a lot of times, because it was a religious school or with a lot of Christians there, happened to be used for religious purposes a lot. But the actual intent of the legislation was serving secular legislative purpose. And as Casey mentioned, through the progression of all the legislation, you could see them trying to be more and more adhesive to all of the different religions and respectful. It also involved, its primary effect was an outright endorsement, but as I mentioned earlier, just granting them the ability to exercise private free speech. So because it was individuals acting and they weren't pressured by the school, this would have been private free speech. And so this would have also upheld the primary effect. And then it, of course, upheld the excessive entanglement because there was no funds or no entanglement in religion. It was just allowing people to say whatever they wanted before football games, which happened to be invocations in this case. Going on to the next case, which is the Levy-Wiseman test in 1992. This kind of arose from a controversy that stemmed from a religious graduation speech given by a rabbi, as directed by the school. And so in the past, the Supreme Court ruled that the schools can't sponsor intentional religious speakers under the Establishment Clause. However, Casey and I think that this is an entirely different case, and the dissent makes a really good point of arguing this. The dissent argues that in the Santa Fe Independent School District versus Doe case, this wouldn't be government speech because the Santa Fe Independent School District doesn't choose the student, doesn't elect the student, doesn't tell the student what to say, doesn't pressure them to say anything. This is very much the students saying whatever they want under their own religion and exercising their freedom of expression and freedom of religion under the Establishment Clause. Because, as Casey mentioned, in the elections and the amendments to the policies, students could have chosen any type of speaker they wanted, and the Establishment Clause at the end of the day serves to protect private speech. And in this case, this is very different. This is private speech because the students themselves are choosing what they want to say.
All right, and then our last case that we'll talk about here is Ward v. Rock against racism. This case addresses the content neutrality principle, and in this case, New York City imposed noise restrictions on a concert, and the government actually ruled in favor of this, saying that the government is able to choose the time, place, and manner of restrictions as long as it is content neutral. And so a lot of the concerns that people had with the students in the election process in Santa Fe is that basically the majority got to choose what was talked about because they chose whether to have it, and then they also got to choose the person, and then as a result, the minority felt that they weren't being represented. But we also said that this applies to any student position that's by election and that is held for the year, as this position was also held by the year. There would be favorable speech, or it would be content neutral because they were elected and they get to choose basically what is talked about, but also in the student government role, they get to choose how they run things. So one, we don't really agree with their argument there. And then also the Establishment Clause doesn't even mandate content neutrality. Again, that goes to private speech. If you choose to talk about your own religion and again, your own private religious expression, not endorsed by the government, you don't have to be content neutral. You can talk about what you believe openly and freely. So just to wrap up, we do see the value in being able to voice your concerns. If you feel that your religious freedom is not being protected or you feel that's being infringed upon or threatened, we 100% see the value in being able to take that to court and being able to really express your concerns to the government. But we also don't think that that was the case in this specific example. We think that it wasn't school endorsed and that they really put it into the hands of the students to choose whether they wanted this to happen and who they wanted to deliver it, if so. And so what that student chose to express was their own private free expression, and that should have been protected under the First Amendment Establishment Clause. Thank you.
Thank you.